So the remainder of our time is scheduled as a town hall during which we, the DSPO staff, will answer your questions submitted either during registration or throughout the conference using the Q&A tool for those of you in Zoom or via email for everyone else. I'd like to welcome the rest of my staff to join me in this session. Some of them you've already heard from, of course, Tasha and Himanshu you just heard from. Ms. Robin Brown, Mr. Jim Stein, Tim Kazansky, and Lloyd Thomas you heard from yesterday. Welcome back. And as well as Ms. Karen Brown, Ms. Nicole Dumm, and Mr. Jesse Chambers. I believe are all online. Before we get started, thank you to all of you who submitted questions and to Ms. Christine Metz for helping compile the questions for this session and for fielding the questions for each session over the past 2 days. The questions for this session will be presented for everyone in Zoom and on WebEx, and then I'll direct them to the cognizant members of the DSPO staff. So with that, the first question, please. All right, first question is, what is the current status of active Defense Acquisition University courses related to the Defense Standardization Program? Tasha, you just touched on this with Himanshu. Over to you.
Okay, this question, the offering discussed just 15, 20 minutes ago. We have a full offering of standardization courses and as well as courses in DMSMS, parts management. Robin Brown touched on the efforts going on in her program area. In terms of the overall standardization courses, the offerings are still available. We are working closely with DAU to ensure course content is still relevant. And I won't dare say correct because they're ultimate professionals at DAU, so I believe the content is correct, but we want to make sure that it remains relevant. We also want to make sure that standardization content appears in other courses like logistics, acquisition courses. So we are working with DAU to make that happen. And although we rely on DAU to deploy training, such as the new parts and material lifecycle management credential discussed by Robin Brown, we're also using other means to deploy training in bite sizes. And when I say bite sizes, sometimes we've noticed that parts of our community, whether it's the international standardization community, the NATO HODs or SMEs, or folks who are standardization management activities, and they're using Assist a lot, but they're having difficulties understanding how to submit a document or how to simultaneously initiate and coordinate a document. We stand up pop-up courses via webinars so that we can address specific topics, specific training needs, and then we wait until the next time. So the courses are still relevant, they're still available. Please check our website for any new updates. The website link is in the previous presentation. And if you have suggestions for other topics, either a webinar or content for current DAU courses, please let us know.
It helps if I come off of mute. So our second question is there required training for participants in NGS committees? So, Tim, would you like to handle this one?
I can certainly do that. Can you all hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. So we do offer courses through DAU, as well as some online training modules through DAU that do provide training on non-government standards. However, the training on those is mainly geared towards non-government standards and more centered around the selection and use. We don't have a course on actual participating. However, one of our guide documents, SD9, which Ms. Beckman had mentioned, is DoD guidance on participation in the development and use of non-government standards. And it offers a lot of information on what one that is participating for the first time would need to know. The guidance itself within that document provides a background on our NGS program. It provides information on the environment in which we operate and the types of NGS bodies that you'll be working with. It also talks about adopting non-government standards and replacing government documents with those non-government standards. And it's written, obviously, from the slant of a government worker, not someone necessarily from the outside. And in addition, really more to the question that's being asked, the document also has a chapter on the participation with non-government standards bodies. And that chapter touches on things like guidance for DoD representatives in those groups, the criteria that's required for participation, general responsibilities, participating responsibilities, funding regarding participation, and organizational memberships. So it's definitely worth the read if anybody is getting involved in that sort of work and wants a primer on, how it all sort of factors into what we do. The document can be downloaded from our website. If you go to the Policy and Guidance tab and then click on the Guidance sub-tab, all of the SD documents are listed there, and you can pull the SD9 and just download it straight from the website. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And before we move on, I'd also like to just highlight we have a training tab under, I believe it's in the Get Involved tab on our website, where there's a listing of other available training from ANSI and NIST. And we'll often, if we become aware of standards training events that are open to everyone, then we'll post those on our website. I think 2 years ago, we actually hosted a simulation training as part of the workshop. All right, on to the next question. How does your organization fit within the Defense Logistics Agency? So I'll go ahead and talk to this one. It's already come up a couple times, but it's a good question to address here, as we often get the question, because mainly I think because our emails all end in DLA.mil. But while we sit at DLA headquarters, DSPO was aligned in 2008 by a general order to support the Defense Standardization Executive under the Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. And we support the executive in the implementation of DSP policies and programs, as we've discussed. The arrangement has suited us well, as the standardization mission transcends the R&E and A&S organizational boundaries, as our OSD organization has split. And what was ATNL a few years ago is now divided into R&E and A&S. We've worked, of course, we report under R&E, but we also work closely with each of the services and agencies, including DLA R&D, for example, on projects evaluating new technologies for maintenance and implementation of standardization documents. DLA also maintains certain support and services on personnel matters and in support of ASSIST. All right, on to the next question. Question 4, how is the Defense Standardization Program working to implement the 2018 DoD Digital Engineering Strategy? All right, I'll start addressing this one, and then I think I'll hand it over to Himanshu for a bit as well. So First, we meet weekly with our colleagues in engineering policy and systems, particularly those that are running the OSD effort for digital engineering. We have staff that participate in the digital engineering working group and other related initiatives. We meet monthly with the service and agency DEPSOs to foster collaboration across the department on standardization issues and initiatives that may include digital engineering. And those forums are the primary means by which DSPO provides standards development and the management framework and expertise to guide efforts such as digital engineering, as there's standards gaps and needs identified within the department, just like any other technical initiative requiring standards. Let's see. In addition to our engagement with the digital engineering efforts and those leading them, we're evaluating multiple options transitioning from our documents from standard text or picture files to other formats. That's where I'll let Himanshu speak for just a little bit.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Yes, as it's mentioned, Assist currently has various standards that have 3D models embedded in them, and you can actually do like a 360-degree rotation like you would in AutoCAD 3D. So that's one effort that has already been implemented. We continue to work with our partners and OSD on the next venture, which is to represent DIDs, the data item descriptions, as models, so that that could be used to interface data with contractors. And we're in the process of generating some sample XMI files that are being prepared for our use as part of the pilot project. As I had also mentioned in the DSP tools overview, we're piloting various XML software packages as well to allow the conversion of documents, whether they be in Word format, PDF format, or whatever the future formats may exist in the world of IT, and convert them over as digital data, XML, so that they can be exported or downloaded in large data dumps as well. In addition to that, we take active participation with our counterparts over at OSD and are working with them on what needs they may have for modernization, not only in the digital engineering strategy, but as far as models in specific, and maybe even helping them out with other databases that they have as well. And we actively participate in the digital engineering working group as well, which meets every 2 months. That's it for me.
All right, thanks, Himanshu. All right, next question. Are there currently any industrial grade component standards being developed? This would be useful to bridge between military grade, expensive, long lead time, and individual vendor part numbers or single source. Tim, I think this falls under the non-government standards program.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. Good question. Over the last couple of days, we've really heard both the standardization executives from the service side and from the joint standardization boards really talk about the importance and use of non-government standards. And I think really non-government standards are the vehicle that fulfills the answer to that question. Our policies are structured as such that we're implementing what's in federal law and regulation, which talks about a preference to use non-government standards in lieu of government unique or military unique. And we rely on non-government standards to really bridge that source of consensus with the broader industrial base or the industrialized community that do support our systems and our missions as well. With non-government standards, there's an openness to them. They're open to industry. They're open to government. They're open to academia, and they're used globally, right? So from an interoperability standpoint, it's very important. Our policies really work to enable that reliance on standards developing organizations or non-government standards bodies. And I think, as with the intent of, our laws, their use really promotes competition and helps us incorporate the state-of-the-art technologies across, DoD and industry as a whole. And I think that's probably the best way I can answer that question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tim. All right, question 6. What are the biggest challenges the DoD faces when trying to understand and consume technical documents and data from industry? So I think this question is much broader than just standardization, and perhaps is better addressed by some of my colleagues within engineering policy and systems who are working with the digital engineering efforts. That said, I will echo what I think it was Ms. Kristen Baldwin said yesterday, the Air Force standardization executive, probably more eloquently than I will, that coordination across government and industry and within standards development organizations to develop standards, tools, practices required to realize digital transformation is an ongoing challenge. This is one of the questions that came in with the registrations. We took the opportunity to pass it over to some of our DEPSOs as well, and the Navy in particular provided input that they've experienced a challenge with keeping up with the rate of changes in data tools. So where they may have multiple contractors and they often use different tools, every year there's a better tool. And so an effort that started, say, 3 years ago, used a different data tool that worked for the program at the time. And now a new program will have a better tool to choose from today. But there's the effort needed to standardize so that there is compatibility amongst those tools throughout the life cycle of program or system. Himanshu, do you have anything to add there?
I would say, yeah, we do face challenges in the sense that sometimes there are some agencies and some groups of individuals that want to keep documents to themselves. Mostly they're concerned about implementation or incorrect implementation. But, we've been able to bridge that gap quite a bit in the near future, particularly in the near recent months, I should say, particularly with MOSA, creating the MOSA standardization area, providing administrative and admin notices, and also getting the services to come together and work collaboratively on developing consolidated lists of standards as well. And then once we have those, at least we know the scope of what we're looking at, not only to populate into tools such as an assist, but also what types of formats they exist in, not only within the document, but the actual file type itself.
So I will take that question back to my colleagues, but I hope that that answer at least scratched the surface in answering the question. So next question, we have, what role will DSP play in the DoD R&E tasker on microelectronics security standards required by National Defense Authorization Act, Section 224? So this is an effort that Greg Saunders engaged on early on, and I've picked up where he left off. Jim and Robin are also engaged for GuideUp and DMS/MS, respectively. One of the things that Greg did working with the team over in another office under R&E that's leading this effort is it reached out with an RFI to several standards development organizations and received replies from I think it was 4 of them. And then more recently, we've reached out to ANSI to expand the reach of the effort. Section 224 requires coordination with multiple departments: Department of Commerce, Department of State, Homeland Security, as well as the insurance industry, major industry sector suppliers. So ANSI, as you heard earlier today, in its unique role as the National Standards Coordinator, provides a unique opportunity to reach across government and industry sectors by facilitating workshops and the collaboratives like with most recently added manufacturing and unmanned aerial systems. So we're exploring options there. It could be a or a collaborative over the coming months or year. There's an initial report due from, the requirement is in Section 224 for an initial report to Congress, I think the beginning of 2021, and the work is expected to continue for a couple of years beyond that. So as I said, Jim and Robin are also engaged. Jim, could you provide a little your perspective on what GuideUp offers?
Yes, thank you, Michael. As I discussed yesterday, GuideUp's mission is to facilitate information exchange across DoD enterprise and the industrial base. So, as you just mentioned regarding 224, we're at the beginning of a very long journey. And as the team develops requirements for information sharing, GuideUp can integrate those needs into our architecture and make that sharing of work. But as of today, there is no firm requirement or details for me to provide. But we will keep people updated as we move along. Over.
Okay, and thanks, Jim. And Robin, do you have anything to add from a DMSMS perspective?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so what we're doing is I am attending weekly meetings and helping the team to ensure that they know about the DMSMS and parts selection, parts management, guidance, policy, standards that are already out there, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel, and making sure that as companies are designing parts for us and we're procuring those parts, that we're choosing, that they're choosing their parts wisely in design. So that's the role that I have.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Yeah, just to summarize, we're working with the microelectronics team as they've really done a fantastic job of identifying what policies, standards already exist and how they could fit into a framework, a larger framework for approaching the trusted microelectronics supply chain challenge. It's really a monumental effort, and we'll continue to work with them as they identify standards gaps and needs, and as well as within incorporating GuideUp and DMSMS practices and tools as well. All right, what is our next question? How does DoD coordinate with ANSI? So we've talked quite a bit about this already. I'll give a brief introduction and then turn it over to Tim to expand and fill in the gaps where I left things out. I'm sure I will. As you heard from our keynote speaker, Tia, ANSI serves a very unique role, promoting the use of U.S. standards internationally across the globe, advocating for U.S. policy and technical positions in international and regional standards organizations. They encourage the adoption of international standards as national standards where they meet the needs of the user community of the DoD. And they're the sole U.S. representative and dues-paying member of the two major non-treaty international standards organizations, the IEC and ISO. So, of course, DoD has we've had a lengthy relationship with ANSI. DSPO pays I think Tasha touched on this already, the DSPO pays the DoD membership in ANSI. We sit on multiple forums, the government member forum, and our staff sits on several councils and panels. I'll let Tim get into that. We've also facilitated the coordination of the ANSI-led revision to the U.S. standards strategy, providing feedback from the DoD components. And we've participated in and sponsored ANSI collaboratives. So before I steal all of this thunder, Tim.
Thanks, Mike. You didn't leave me much to work with here. As Michael said, there are numerous ways in which DoD participates with ANSI. Obviously, as he stated, ANSI it does support us, or I guess the term I'm digging for here is represents us globally. They are responsible for accrediting and approving technical advisory groups or mirror committees to the ISO and IEC. So it's important to know that DoD personnel do work with ANSI or through ANSI in order to request memberships and participate on these technical committees. As Michael also mentioned, there are numerous collaboratives out there, and there have been over the years, which really are there to coordinate and accelerate the development of standards and conformity assessment programs needed in a given domain. Most recently, collaboratives on unmanned aircraft systems, we heard that being brought up in today's briefings, as well as additive manufacturing, are just two of those collaboratives that ANSI sponsors, and we do have DoD participation on them. And then last but not least, what Michael stated and also Tasha had stated, several members of our office do serve on ANSI policy advisory groups, along with other governmental counterparts from EPA, Department of Commerce, NIST, FDA, as an example, as well as the broader industrial base. So there are a lot of ways in which we, DoD, coordinate with ANSI, and ANSI coordinates with us and helps us or brings us to the forum of a much broader standardization group of stakeholders, so that we can all work together and be able to make our systems interoperable and allow our voice to be heard. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Next question. A general question related to alliance interoperability. Will the intended policy and guidance updates encourage direct use of STANAGs or continue with FMs for the operational standards? Tasha, I'll turn this one over to you.
Okay. Before I answer the question, I want to state that I'm unsure what is meant by direct use of standardization agreements, aka STANAGs. So I'm going to take an educated guess. I have many years of experience working NATO standardization. That was the role that I was hired to perform in support of Greg Saunders' huge role within NATO standardization management group. And I've spent a lot of time supporting NATO standardization policy, as well as the US's implementation of it. So I'm thinking, my guess is correct, that when you mean direct use of STANAGs, I take that to mean the use of a STANAG without an implementation document. You mean a standalone STANAG. I don't have to guess what FM means because we've received some clarification. You are referring to Army field manuals. So I have 4 bullet points to respond to that question. So DoD policy already encourages the implementation of STANAGs, but the implementation of STANAGs in accordance with our national ratification response. The lead agent, meaning the DoD component responsible for our engagement in a NATO working group, I'm referring to any group within NATO that develops standards. I know they all go by different names, from Military Committee Standardization Board to CNAD, AC, Allied Committee groups, but for the sake of this engagement, I'll refer to them as working groups. So lead agents are responsible for providing U.S. representation, heads of delegations, subject matter experts to participate in the development of standards in a particular subject matter. And towards the end of that development process, nations are asked, if it's a STANAC, nations are asked, to provide a response to the document. What say you, nation? Do you plan to use the document? And that response would be in the form of a ratification response. It's either you're ratifying and implementing, you're not ratifying, you're not participating in the effort. Say nation may not have that capability, so they're not participating. Within the United States, when we coordinate documents for a ratification response, and I'm just going to pick a lead agent, I'll say the Army, since we're talking about Army field manuals. So if this is in the Military Committee Land Standardization Board, the Army G357 will coordinate the STANAC to the other components who have an interest in that area. And they may coordinate with the Army, the Navies, the Air Force, and maybe some OSD offices that are interested in that particular area. And if throughout that coordination process, they decide that the document cannot be used by itself, in your words directly, that it requires a supplemental document, a military standard, military spec, policy document, an SD document, a document of tables, whatever we decide is the U.S. implementation document, then that's our response. But that decision is made by the lead agent who's responsible for staffing the document for ratification. And that is okay. There is nothing wrong with having a STANAC that has an implementation document. Our policy allows for that, and it tells lead agents how to coordinate with the owners of the implementation documents to make sure that an implementation document isn't canceled while we're still using the STANAC. When the time comes for that STANAC to be revised, it's the lead agent or whoever's participating in that group on behalf of the U.S. should bring forward the U.S. issues. Maybe, and having an implementation document is not a negative. Maybe the United States is using another standard that covers the requirement in the STANAC and is more stringent. Maybe our rules requires an additional step or something extra. Then when the document's being reviewed, we should bring that idea to the working group and say, I really think that in order for the U.S. to fully implement this document without an implementation document, or this other concept is great for the alliance, you bring that to the group and maybe they'll incorporate that into the document, and there may not be a need for an additional document. The other cases, the document, the STANAC might not meet our requirements, and the same thing applies there. If the document doesn't meet our requirement, we have to submit a comment or reservation. Then when the document is reviewed for update, we need to bring that to the table and say, we really couldn't use this document in full because of X, Y, Z. And it's okay to not use a document in whole or directly. The other part of your question is related to the use of STANACs. I'm assuming that's what that's related to. It is perfectly okay to cite content that's in a STANAC in a field manual. It is easier, in my opinion, and I'm not an operator. Well, I'd say I am an operator. I operate things. And I think it's easier to have one document that has all the information that I need in it than to have to carry around multiple documents in order to perform an attendant function. So NATO's policy allows for that. It allows for nations to implement STANACs the way they see fit in accordance with their ratification responses. So in summary, it is up to the lead, whoever's the lead agent within the department, to decide how we plan to implement a NATO STANAC, what we will use to implement it, and how we provide feedback to the Alliance on how we actually implement that STANAC. So the policy that we plan to issue is to capture what I just said, provide the heads of delegations, provide the ratifying officials, provide the lead agents with information on how to select implementation documents, how to provide the feedback to NATO on what we're using to implement a STANAC, and how to report our implementation of STANACs back to the Alliance so that they know what our capabilities are and how we plan to engage in an operation. So if I didn't, answer your question fully, you have my contact information. Google me, find me on our website, and we can have a more engaging conversation about standardization within NATO.
Thank you, Tasha. And that goes for all of the questions. If we miss a nuance or don't quite understand a aspect of a question, please reach out to us if we've failed to fully answer the question that's being asked. We've had a few questions about training and education. Tasha, could you quickly just summarize what policy and guidance is available and or training resources are available for anyone that's just getting involved in international standardization?
Okay. As mentioned earlier, well, maybe I didn't mention it, but within NATO, we have the NATO Committee for Standardization. Excuse me, Mr. Eric Fleming, whom you all have heard from on yesterday. He is the United States representative to the NATO Committee for Standardization, the CS for short. Under the CS, there's only one body that reports to the CS, and that's the Standardization Management Group, the SMG. I am the U.S. member to the SMG. The U.S. used to have chairmanship. Our former director was the chair for many, many years. Now it's chaired by the UK. The role of the SMG is to help the Committee for Standardization develop, revise, update NATO standardization policy, and to also engage with their nations, their national capitals, in the implementation of that policy and the coordination and staffing of that policy as we revise it. And another part of the role of the SMG is to develop training programs for our nations, for the Alliance. Commander Marionis, who spoke on yesterday on the NATO defense planning process, he is the chairman of the education panel under the CS/the SMG. I sit on that panel. I am a member of that panel, and we develop training programs from the Civil Standards course workshop that Mr. Joe Batia spoke about this morning. I actually was a guest speaker at that event earlier this year. The standardization within NATO course is hosted in Poland twice a year. The NATO custodian training course that's hosted by Greece twice a year. I've actually served as a guest lecturer there as well. And due to COVID, the education panel, we're trying to come up with creative ways to deploy that same training using webinars, using technology. We will meet in short order to discuss what Greece has come up with so that we can provide digital or virtual training. Within the Defense Standardization Program Office this year, our standardization webinar series entitled Standardization Table Topics focused on international standardization agreements with an emphasis on NATO. The webinars, the 4 webinars are in assist. They're available for your review. The DAU partnered with us to help us deploy that training. And if you reach out to us, particularly, you can reach out to me as well as, another member on our staff who supports me in the International Standardization Program, Ms. Lisa English. We can provide you with all the points where you can go to access the training, and as well as the slide decks. And I am willing, I have met one-on-one with individuals for an hour, hour and a half to help them meet their NATO standardization training needs. So please reach out to us and we will work with you. If we have to if we have enough of you and we have to stand up a training session, we'll do it. Because education is important to standardization. It's not enough to just issue policy and guidance and hope or think that someone will read it and understand. I'll be the first to tell you, when I started working NATO standardization back in 2004, I had to read AEP3 India. We were on the I version, now we're on K. I had to read it several times and I still couldn't understand it because of the terminology. I wasn't familiar with standardization in the US, let alone NATO. So I understand that it is frustrating, but please reach out to us. And as I said, we are flexible. We have DAU courses for standardization training, and we will stand up courses to help you meet your training needs.
Thanks, Tasha. Next question. Looks like it's on DIDS. Is there a plan to update data item descriptions to reflect the proper handling of data generated from the DID? Or is there a way to make determinations? For example, if the DID were to generate internal traffic in arms regulations or ITARs, or export administrative regulations, or controlled unclassified information, I would know to mark it appropriately. It would be helpful to the government and industry if DIDs were marked in this way to ensure that proper handling is factored into proposal costs. Karen, would you please address this question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Well, as a rule, most repetitive use DIDs, which are actually all the DIDs that are in assist, can cover a waterfront in terms of usage. However, the government would only know at the time of application whether the data deliverable would be controlled distribution or not, which is why the CDRL and not the DID is the best vehicle for DoD to use to let the contractor know whether the data should be marked with a controlling distribution statement. Specifically, Block 9 of the CDRL must indicate the proper distribution statement of the data that's required for each DID that's listed on the CDRL. And this is the responsibility of the DoD activity requiring the data. And this is where contractors should look for this information. Over.
All right, thank you, Karen. Next question. What are some best practices for addressing counterfeit parts? That's a pretty broad question, but Jim, you want to take a stab at it?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. We hear you loud and clear. We did. You still there?
I apparently muted myself while I was trying to make sure I was unmuted, so I'm back.
Okay, we hear you now.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much for the question. There are a lot of best practices, but I'll run through some of the basics that everyone should be considering. First of all, you need to know the parts that make up the system you manage or the ones you're considering using, since much of the effort in determining if you have risk is focused at the part level. If you're buying a fully functional box or subsystem, you really have to understand the counterfeit prevention credentials of the manufacturer of that system. As an example, if you wanted to integrate a Dell computer into your flying, platform, you have to consider what Dell does to prevent counterfeits, and work with that. It may require a lot of testing on your part. That's part of the business. It's always important to know your suppliers, and more importantly, the suppliers who supply your suppliers. If they have adequate processes, you're safer. If you can't get any idea of what their processes are, or they hold up a signed certificate that says, you know, my friend Vinny said I have a good process, you have something to be concerned with. But no matter what, the farther down you go in your supply chain, the more likely the company sells mostly to commercial customers who may not have that same counterfeit avoidance requirement that you do, and therefore may not treat all parts the same. And then you're at risk of them having to go and do some special testing on the parts that you want, that is above and beyond what others wish to have. Another important feature is to make sure you have adequate provisions in your contract that cause you to have discussions with your suppliers, as I mentioned above. Another thing is to keep informed of developing trends. Several years ago, everyone was concerned only with microelectronics, and out of the blue, DuPont, the manufacturer of Freon, became aware of counterfeit Freon as a result of explosions on cargo ships. Now, so it's cargo ships. We don't have to worry. Well, when you start to think about it, Freon goes into a lot of things, and it's usually older systems that you don't simply say, well, I'll just buy a new, you know, I have a old car, I buy a new car, I don't have Freon anymore. It was discovered that this counterfeit Freon was making its way into other things like wheeled and tracked vehicles over in the Asian area of operation. It was being found to cause problems in tactical shelters because they needed air conditioning systems. It's very scary stuff, but the important thing is to make sure you're aware of the trend and then decide how it might impact you. It's always good to get a copy of the non-government standards that DoD has adopted, which are listed in ASSIST, to understand what the government believes is, you know, a starting point for counterfeit mitigation. I think those are the top ones to consider when you're starting out to learn about counterfeit prevention. Over.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And of course, as counterfeit or possible counterfeit items are identified, please feed them back into the GuideUp database. Just this morning, an interagency panel, there was a series of briefings on COVID-19 mitigations and PPE, and Department of Homeland Security had identified some possible counterfeit masks. So today it's masks for prevention of COVID spread. Previously it was gas masks. Oftentimes we're talking about microelectronics though. So anytime there's any counterfeit identified, please feed that back in so we can all benefit from it. All right, question 12. Enterprise-wide access within ASSIST provides an outstanding enabler opportunity. When do you anticipate this to be fully resourced and accessible? Tim, I'll ask you to address this one first, and then Himanshu, if you have anything to add regarding ASSIST modifications, please do so.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, that's the $64,000 question. Actually, it's more than 64,000. There's a lot of moving parts with that project, right? It's and it's specifically dependent on a dedicated funding source in order to support the effort. We are actively working that, and while we want this capability as soon as possible, there is work that we still need to do on our end before we'll be able to realize the access piece of it. Certainly, we are probably as close in terms of support for this level of effort than I think we've ever been. and the project continues to evolve. But I will say this, as we get closer to this becoming a reality, we certainly will keep all of the DoD stakeholders in the loop in terms of where we are at intervals. Right now, I don't have an end date, but understand that it's a large level of effort and that we are making progress. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think the question is primarily about the resourcing of the updates to assist to enable enterprise-wide access and the contracting that has to be in place to do that. But Himanshu, did you have anything to add that you would like to add from an assist management perspective?
I would say that is one of the goals of the modernization of Assist, is not only to provide enterprise-wide access, but possibly even to make other modules and features that might be distro statement A publicly releasable, that sometimes you still have to go through a little bit of hoops with a commercial account, for example, or your CAC to gain access to.
All right, thank you. All right, what are DSPO's priorities for 2021 and 2022? So I'll touch on this one. So for a couple of years now, the focus areas for DSPO have been continuity, and that's where we get to the training and education necessary within DSPO, as we've replaced several staff members. But also across the DoD. We've really been working hard to develop and deliver training and education resources for anyone that is just entering the standardization world, so that we can get standards, tools, and processes in the hands of the SMEs of the engineering and acquisition workforce. Second, modernization, especially with regards to the R&E priorities, partnerships within DoD, interagency, and with international partners, and fourth, responsiveness to emerging needs and priorities across the department. Our mission remains relevant. It hasn't changed. It's that we champion standardization through the Department of Defense to reduce costs and improve operational effectiveness. But we monitor and engage the community to prioritize and identify any emerging needs where we need to address specific items for reducing costs and improving our operational effectiveness. And one of the ways we do that is through events like this, and seeking your feedback. Again, I'll take one more opportunity to note, by now you should all have an evaluation form in your inbox through which you registered for the conference. Please send us your thoughts and suggestions. And working with the DEPSOs, we maintain awareness of standardization issues within the DoD departments. And then finally, we also prioritize according to the SecDef's priorities and the lines of effort. Of course, you've heard those a few times today, but restore military readiness as we build a more lethal force. Of course, our efforts with digital engineering, with MOSA, additive manufacturing, AI, and other technology modernization efforts are all working to improve military readiness and lethality through efficiencies. Strengthen alliances and attract new partners. We're going to continue our engagement in NATO and other multinational treaty-based standardization efforts, as well as efforts with nations such as Colombia, who joined us for some of our training earlier today. And we engage across the government via Interagency Council for Standards Policy, which I just referred to. I was a participant in this morning, as well as the ANSI forums, including the government member forum, which is usually a joint meeting with the organizational member forum with representatives from the SDOs and industry. And then we engage directly with SDOs and industry, particularly SAE, AIA, ASTM, and others that we've mentioned over the past couple of days. And then the third line of effort brings business reforms to the DoD. We're currently working with the DoD CIO and DISA to federate the DISR and assist. And again, the digital engineering as an effort, and when it's paired with some of the other modernization efforts across the department, becomes a big, it will have an impact that will reform the way we design and procure systems. So with that, we have just a couple minutes. Do we have any questions in the Q&A?
Yes, I have some questions that came in during the town hall. Let me see here. Okay, I have a follow-up question to the use of the S-Series specifications.
Yes.
Okay, so the previous speaker replied in the affirmative that they were being used, or they're meant to be included. That being said, will there be future plans to include discussion about the S-Series specifications?
We can certainly consider that for a future event. If there's enough interest in it, then we may be able to address the interest via another form instead of waiting a year or two for another conference. We could hold a more of an ad hoc meeting or webinar if that is needed. But I'll take the opportunity to also just encourage participation in the standards development organizations. So I'm not sure what questions we would answer other than just providing an overview of the S series, which we could certainly do.
The next question I have is, would you please elaborate on the Federation plans with ASSIST and DISR?
Okay. I'll keep it brief. So we are working with DISA now to identify what the technical requirements are to actually make the connection. We're going to take a phased approach, but our initial phase will include DISR as a source of a regulatory or policy-based mandate. So adding in most likely sources that are currently in the SD21, which is a list of legally mandated or regulatory mandates for use of standards. We're automate that as we've done with the SD1, which is the list of contacts provided via ASSIST. So we're looking at incorporating SD21 and along with that DISR as one of those sources of a mandate to use a standard. So it'll be indicated by standardization document when you search for the documents in ASSIST. So that's what we're working towards now with DISA. So with that, I think we should wrap it up now. Thank you everyone for the questions. And yeah, before we close, I just want to take one more opportunity to thank everyone who made this event possible. As many of you are aware, I returned this summer from a year assignment overseas, so I take no credit for the planning and preparation that went into making this conference a reality. I certainly didn't imagine a year ago that we would be hosting a virtual event with well over 200 participants and attendees. Specifically, I want to thank Mr. Greg Saunders, who's now re-retired. Greg, if you're out there, thank you. Again, I can't say it enough. Greg returned to lead DSPO while I was downrange, and also big thanks to Deputy Tasha Beckman, who's worked just tirelessly, and the rest of the DSPO staff, especially Ms. Nicole Dumm and Ms. Jamie Rucker, as well as LMI and Northrop Grumman for helping make this event possible and really worthwhile event for the attendees. Thank you. And thank you for the participation from everyone in standardization efforts around the globe. Your efforts make our engineering and our systems more efficient and effective. They enable innovation and improve the lethality and readiness of systems for the warfighter. I hope you found this event to be beneficial and useful, that you're able to take knowledge and find tools and skills that you're able to take back with you to your everyday job. Thank you again. This concludes our conference, and I hope everyone stays healthy. Thank you.